Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile video. In this one, I'm going to talk about a really solid League starter build for 3.16, and that is a Carrion Golem. And I will explain why the Carrion Golem is better for League starting than the Stone Golem, because it is vastly superior, and you might have been misled when it comes to the Stone Golem efficiency, and I'll talk about that in detail in this video. But first off, I'm going to show you the rough draft of the PUB for this. I will obviously be updating the build guide that I have on PoE Vault for this build, and that will be linked in the descriptions below. The guide is at the current time of this upload and not updated yet, but the PUB will be available in the descriptions below. So, this is a Carrion Golem Necromancer, because Necromancer is just vastly superior over the Elementalist. The items that I'm using in this build, I have a Tabula Rasa edited with plus 2000 armor. It's actually a little bit more than that, because we are using the Aura Determination. However, that's not included. Obviously, any type of armor with life or resistances and armor would be better. You want to use base armor pieces across the board with this type of build. It's very easy to hit 90% physical damage mitigation with this. I'm using generic, just bullshit gear. There's a armor-based helmet, there's an armor-based boots, armor-based gloves and whatnot. We're actually overcapped. I do believe you can get much less armor than these. I think these tiers are actually a little bit high, to be fair, on the armors. So you might want to look into that. However, we are also going to look into our rings to try to make sure there's a suffix slot open to get in minimum endurance charge included. This allows you to get that physical damage mitigation up and allows to have less pressure on your armor pieces. Amulet, very simple. I've added some Chaos Rest and Elemental Resistances for the sake of checking the EHP calculator in this. So obviously these numbers are not something you'll ever see. However, what we've done with the checks is that you kind of want to go for some Chaos Resistance on the actual gear. What you can do with this build is you can skip the increased AoE from Fearsome Force and pick up something like Chaos Resistance nodes, which you can if you do change the routing, and pick up Asylum, which gives you some extra Chaos Resistance if you want to. Not something that I would recommend. I'd rather push it out on gear. The other gear pieces is the 2 Clay Shapers early on, so you can get a 6 total count of Golems. And Darkness and Throne with generic jewels. I did add an accuracy roll because I wanted to do some tests. You can skip this by taking the mastery that gives you plus accuracy. The problem is that the access to accuracy on normal jewels is very easy to achieve, and they're very cheap. You should never need to spend that heal point. There is a Rumis in this build. There is a Divine Flask, Life Flask. There's a Quicksilver, Granite Flask of Iron Skin. To keep up with the physical damage mitigation. You can use whatever you want on the last spot. There is 1 of each primordial jewel in this setup. So this is basically your day 1 gear progression, and once you're done with the gear progression, your next step that you want to do is get these jewels. You can self-farm these from the primordial divination card. These are essentially the most expensive pieces on this low budget initial start for the build. Not sure what the prices will be for them. You can self-farm them through the primordial card like I mentioned, but these will be rather crucial, and this is where we're going to talk about the Stone Golem approach as well. So I'm going to check the tree first. Obviously, we're going to take as few points as we can to get the most crucial nodes. We're going to oil the Ravenous Horde, but this one costs an actual golden oil. So if you can't afford this one, honestly, just don't bother oiling your amulet till you have your in-game amulet that you want to use and then get the Ravenous Horde. It's a nice bonus for clearing, but that's it. So don't really go too crazy on it. We're going to start off by taking the nodes out here. I would recommend speccing into spell damage early on, the level with spells, till you get the at least 1 or 2 Clay Shapers, and then you can respec these nodes into the generic tree, so you can start using golems as you're leveling through the axe. But the most optimal way for the endgame tree is to go on the right-hand side, because we want to pick up Grave Intentions and extra max elemental resistances, because this is going to keep your army most alive pretty much against anything. But most importantly, this is for your Animate Guardian and your Spectres, because Spectres, the Carnage Chieftain and Host Chieftain, to allow us to get Frenzy and Power charges, they have a tendency of dying quite a lot. However, the Grave Intentions lets them survive very effectively. Then we would cross over through the nodes in here. And I would honestly do this with a tree and skip this. And we might actually skip that node as well. So we go through the nodes. Actually, I want to keep that up. So we're going to pick up these nodes up here and go straight up to Jewel Locket, so that we can pick up Golem Commander. This is something I would honestly rush into. If you do the build with spell damage, I would take the spell damage, I would take life nodes and just cross over and go up here, and then take the life nodes and then pick up Golem Commander if I'm able to get myself hands on the Clay Shaper. Then obviously we can skip the Death Attunement, but you can spec into the nodes before to scale your golems, but only take Death Attunement when you start using Spectres, which you should wait a little bit with, because when you do so, you kind of want to have these nodes to keep them alive. and don't take the Cluster Jewel until later. The Rotten Claw in here is not mandatory. You can wait with this and take this later, because we are not going to be scaling too much of Impale. However, it is a very nice addition to the build. Having Rotten Claws is good, but it's not mandatory. However, I would look into the renewal, because it's going to help you do more damage more effectively. So this will be the highest priority when it comes to the Cluster Jewel itself. A Cluster Jewel like this is very cheap. You can get higher amount of passives. The build tree is using only 113 points in the end version of this low budget. So you can have Cluster Jewels with 9, 10, 11, 12 passives instead, depending on whatever is cheapest. Just make sure the item level can roll the renewal. You can just alteration craft it. There's nothing else on this Cluster Jewel, and skipping the Rotten Claws is perfectly fine. So prioritize renewal, augment it, regal it, and keep it. That's it. Then the Fearsome Force, not really mandatory for this approach. It is a nice clear speed enhancer through the Cascade ability that they're running with, and then you just want to run down and get the Purity Flush. The Sovereignty is very important with the Mastery for Restoration, Master Racing 15% mana restoration efficiency, which is allowing us to run a bunch more auras. Then I would spec into both Righteous Army and Redemption, and picking up the 16% minion damage nodes on the side to ramp up our damage even further. Get the jewel slot when you have access to more of the primordial jewels. Get the life nodes and cross over to the right hand side. Now in here, if you feel safe, then I would skip the life node and go straight into Grave Pact. And if you feel like you're being a bit squishy, then you go for the Discipline and Training first, and then pick up Retribution for a little bit more damage, then go Grave Pact. And then you would just pick up Combat Stamina if you feel like you're doing good on the HP and you just want Sustain. This gives you a little bit of HP, but most importantly, it gives you some life regen and armor, which is something we're going to be stacking up a lot of. And then I would honestly go to the right-hand side and pick up Constitution, and then go down to Heart of the Warrior, and as well as Warrior's Blood for more regeneration. And that's the generic tree that we have for this build. Skill-wise, we're going to take the main link gems in a second. We're going to start with the remaining first utility stuffs. Obviously, we'll have a Desecrate and Flesh Offering, and we're going to use the Skitterbot. The chill effect is just nice, but it doesn't really give us any damage like we do with Cold Conversion, which is this build is not going to do. However, it gives the enemy shock effect, which is really good for damage increase. Auras, we're going to run Pride Dread Banner with Generosity, and the reason we're using Dread Banner is actually because it is still better than the War Banner, even if we're not scaling Impale. So we are going to get some Impale, just not any heavy focus on it. We're going to talk about that later, actually. Then we have Vitality. Make sure you balance the level of your Vitality skills so that you can still afford spending your mana on your skills. This would be actually a little bit lower in this current set with the current gear. Just make sure you balance the Vitality. It's a nice addition to it, because we're using nodes like the Vitality, mana reservation efficiency. We're also using the flat 50 life early on. Very, very important. The other masters, I actually mentioned them first, and that is that we're using Minions Leech. We have the minions have increased crit. This should be skipped on the low budget, in my opinion, because it's only for higher budget investments. The Overwhelm is underwhelming, no pun intended, but however, it does help versus map mods that have minions, enemies have physical damage reduction. This allows you to penetrate that modifier. So it is nice to have, but I don't think that's that big. And the other nodes we're running with is Determination, mana reservation efficiency, as well as increased effective offerings. And that's basically the list of masteries. So we're going to run a lower level Vitality with Determination, and we're going to run a Vulnerability Curse and Convocation, of course. This setup allows us to not need to use any unset rings, which is really, really nice. We have utility minions being in the form of Enemy Guardian with Ray Spectre, Life Tap, and Meat Shield. This allows your Spectres to consistently smack out the buffs with power charges and frenzy charges. It also keeps both the Spectres and the Enemy Guardian very, very safe, especially in combination with the Grave Intentions on the node for the Chaos Rest and Life as extra energy shield, which is one of the best things you can do with the Enemy Guardian. I'll leave a link in the descriptions below to the in-depth guide for how the Enemy Guardian works mechanically and some gear set suggestions. The only thing that's lacking in that video is the idea of using the Doppelganger Geist, which is actually a very, very good chess piece to use on the Enemy Guardian, because they never actually trigger the ability, so they always take less physical and chaos damage taken, and always regen 10% of their life over 1 second when they're hit. So that is another suggestion you can run with. There will obviously be some changes to that, because we can use endgame stuff like the Gravebind and Exploded Chest and stuff like that, but that is for way higher budgets. So what do we do with our main damage, and why the hell are we not using Stone Golems versus Carrion Golems? First off, we want to have Feeding Frenzy. Since we're scaling physical, we want to have a source of main, and since we want to use Carrion Golems, we want to generate 10 or more minions that are non-golems to make sure that Carrion Golem does as much damage as they can. So We don't want to lose the life regen that we could get from a Stone Golem build, obviously. So with that in mind, we're then in a situation where we want to use Stone Golem. We might as well put Feeding Frenzy and Maim here, and then we can smack in zombies to get those non-golem minions out there. This allows you to have a bigger army of minions soaking up stray projectiles, soaking up the possibility of using a taunt or blind jewels, even if blind was nerfed. Blind jewel will allow you to not even care about accuracy because it lowers the enemy's evasion, so you don't have to worry about accuracy at all with this build. That's another good perk. So that's a really nice way of approaching it, and your build just becomes safer in general doing it this way. However, this golem does take up one of your 6 golem slots with this specific approach. 6 golems comes from the golem commander as well as the 2 clay shapers. That's another 3, so that's 4 on the baseline, and the remaining 2 comes from the anima stone and 1 of each primordial jewel. That's why these will be very crucial to pick up as soon as you can, but they are most likely going to be rather expensive. So the Carrion Golem setup that we're using is Carrion Golem's minion damage, multi-strike, brutality, melee physical. We're gonna use a Ruthless, even though Predator would be better. The damage difference on Predator, 2258, goes up to 2398. You can use your Predator if you want to. The reason I'm not is because I'm okay with losing a little bit of damage, because the Ruthless will give you that base stun on enemies, which can make the build much safer, your minions safer, and it's just so smooth to use, especially when they clap bosses so hard on that third attack. The other setup I have here is a Splash gem. The reason we have Splash is because their Cascade is not the best in the world. If you feel like they're not clearing effectively enough, then you want to run with Melee Splash instead. This also scales up with the Fearsome Force with the Cascade, but ultimately that's how the Link setup will work. You're landing on about 2.3 million Shaper DPS with this build, and that's actually really, really nice. I like Ruthless. I'm not sure if that's going to be the best way to approach it. I think I'd rather run Predator for single target. You could use increased critical strike damage, which would be a bit more damage, but the problem is their crit is not the best around in the world. They have 35% chance. Obviously, if we spec into something like the increased critical strikes with this, you'll see that their critical strike chance goes up to 40%. You could run that, and that would be pretty juicy as well. Honestly, I think this would be a fair assessment to actually running the build. But it also comes down to how you want to approach it when it comes to these support gems and what kind of utility you want from them. However, I'm going to talk about the comparisons between the golems, Carrion versus Stone Golem. Now, a problem we have, especially leading into new release and new leagues, is the fact that we're in a position where a lot of people make league starter builds and they promote their build guides and all these things, and there's a very huge tendency of a lot of people doing things that inflate their DPS to make their builds look better than they actually are. Now, I'm not going to call anyone out because this is not something, I don't think I've seen anyone do this, but I will go through some of the things that you might see in build guides, which makes it very important that you actually double check PUBs before you say, hey, this is a great build, and start playing it, and then you just end up with having a terrible build. First one is Vol skills. If you look at the DPS here with this, we have 2.7 million Shaper DPS. Some builds have a Vol haste, not even using the regular haste, they just have a Vol haste. And then they have checked the Vol haste in the actual PUB, and they'll be like, oh, but the build is doing 3.1 million Shaper DPS, but this is obviously not accurate. This is only accurate during the base duration time of the Vol haste, which in this case is a 4-second duration, where you get a massive amount of attack speed when you have enough souls to use Vol haste. So this is a conditional, rarely used ability, and people use this in their PUBs. Just please be careful when you look at PUBs like this to make sure that you have accurate DPS. So the accurate DPS in this build is 2.7 million. Why would I not use Stone Golems? Stone Golems do more damage. Well, this is calculating their combo attack. Cascade, which is their clearing, is doing significantly less damage, but is more than enough to clear most packs. This is why I'm talking about using Melee Splash, because the cooldown on the Cascade is 4.16 seconds using one Primordial Harmony. This means it's not going to happen that often, which means that if you feel that the clearing is not that effective, you want to slot in a Melee Splash instead of the Melee Physical. They have a Leap Slam, which is the main reason why I like using Carrion Golems over Stone Golems. That's because the Leap Slam has a very short cooldown, good animation, and speed of using it, which is rather low and gets very good scaling from Harmony, like most other Golems. The gap close. They basically leap to the enemies before they do their damage, and that's why they're so effective for clearing compared to Stone Golems. And their combo attack is reaching 2.7 million Shaper DPS with this PUB. Now I'm going to show you the comparison with what happens if you're running with the Stone Golems instead. So we're going to turn that off and we're going to add the Stone Golems. As you can see, the Stone Golems are doing almost 3.6 million shape at DPS. Absolutely crazy. Wow, this is insane, but it's not accurate because they're doing this with their slam ability. Now, the good thing with the slam ability, which makes Stone Golems competitive as a golem, is because they have a rather short cooldown on it. So how do we make this DPS actually accurate? Yeah, but scaling, all you have to do is scale the actual harmony. That means that Stone Golems are not better than Carrion Golems until you stack a fuckload of harmony jewels. On a League start scenario, you actually have none of these. You're running 4 golems till you can get one of each, so you have 6 golems. And at that point, well, the Carrion Golem is still better than the Stone Golems. Not until you start stacking more Primordial Eminence jewels is when the Stone Golem becomes a competitive decision or choice. What is the other differences when it comes to the Stone Golems? Well, their roll ability, which is their gap closer, has a higher base cooldown than Carrion Golems and has a bit of animation issues. This makes it so that the Stone Golems have a worse time of gap closing compared to Carrion Golems, which means that you're in a situation where their clear speed is significantly lower on all fronts. However, the slam ability is fucking beautiful when you stack that cooldown recovery up. But again, that doesn't work on low budget. You'll have to do that on higher budget later, if you want to switch at all at that point. So we know that the gap closing in Carrion Golem is better. We know that the AoE clearing on the slam is better on Stone Golems, but only when if you start stacking them Primordial Harmonies, which is going to be expensive. So then look at the actual DPS that the Stone Golems are doing compared to Carrion. Carrion doing 2.7 million shaper DPS on their actual attack that will happen for the most part. Stone Golem, which is going to use a slam somewhat every now and then, are only doing 2.1 million shaper DPS, and then having the slams happening every 3 seconds or whatever it was on a lower budget, which is only doing 2.1 million. So this is a pretty clear display that the Carrion Golems are going to do significantly better damage or DPS, reliable DPS output, compared to Stone Golem on the lower end budget. And I'd say lower end, and I'm still using one of each Primordial Jewel in the setup. The only time a Stone Golem would be competitive is when you start stacking Eminence Jewels. And I think the Stone Golem builds are really, really good. They really are. But they need to stack Primordial Harmonies to be competitive to a Carrion Golem. So this build guide will be using Carrion Golem, end of story. I don't think there's much else we need to talk about when it comes to this. High budget will remove the clay shapers, and I'm going to look into a high budget design later when I update the build guide, which will be linked in the descriptions below already. That will be updated to 3.16 in the coming days before the launch, and I will have a high budget version in that build guide as well, so stay tuned for that. And I hope you guys had some use of this build guide video league starter suggestion. It's gonna be real fun to play this. I'll definitely be trying it out myself. Not sure if I'm league starting it. Just be careful when you're looking at league starter, boys. It may be my builds or someone else's build. Even double check my builds. We're all human, we make mistakes. Just make sure you're not looking at inflated DPS, and make sure that you're comfortable with the build you're choosing to play. I wish you all the best of luck in Scourge League 3.16, and make sure you hit the like button. Subscribe for more content. Until next time, stay safe, keep rocking.